Hey, so thanks for coming out. Thanks, Josh. And let's actually hit the first slide, and you'll see my appreciation of his Venn diagrams, which I thought was pretty awesome. Yeah. Whoa. So with a book like Cooking for Geeks, I get asked a lot, what's a geek? And this is my answer. You know, the fact that I use a Venn diagram as an answer is one tip off that I'm probably a geek. But also the idea that, you know, geeks aren't nerds. You know, we're obsessed with how things work, and, you know, we got some smarts. We'll throw some brain power at it. But, you know, when it comes to the kitchen, it's, for a lot of people, kind of a mystery about how things work. And so for me, you know, using science is really a way of actually answering what's going on in the kitchen when you start cooking. So science itself is really based on models, and here are 3 dead white guys, all relatively important dead white guys. Aristotle on the left, your left, right, okay. You know, famously came up with the very kind of first example of a model for gravity, how things work. You know, if I picked up something and let it go, it falls. And back in ancient Greece, the idea was that things would fall to their natural resting place. Really simple, not very complicated, but you know, it's a model, it's a starting point. Then you get Newton and Galileo in the 1700s who come up with better models of gravity. In fact, their models are still taught today in high school physics. And you know, for the most part, they're pretty good. But they famously don't account for Mercury's orbit around the sun. And to actually describe why Mercury's orbit is as it is, you actually have to go all the way up to the 20th century and Einstein's general theory of relativity to actually get an even better model. Now, the reason this is actually important is that with better models, you get better predictions. And this is definitely true in the kitchen as well. So, you know, maybe you're thinking right now, well, how does this actually relate to when I go to cook a chocolate chip cookie or a steak? We'll get there, trust me. For myself, looking at science in the kitchen, there's kind of 2 domains. You can look at either empirical stuff or data-driven stuff. You know, the 2 domains of science, really. I mean, science needs both of these things. You know, without, you know, theories to kind of describe how things actually work, well, you know, you don't really have good ways of predicting new things. And without actual data and observations, you don't know if your theories are actually, well, right or not. So, same thing's true in the kitchen. Here's an equation for knowing when your meat is done cooking. We have theories. I can't read tensor equations, that's beyond me. You know, I'm kind of more in the ancient Greece to 18th century model. I'm not really into the 20th century, you know, relativity type models in the kitchen. For me, it's really much more about understanding the data, looking at things empirically, you know, going into your kitchen, treating it as a lab, you know, thermometers, timers, taking notes, taking data, and then approaching it kind of rigorously. Once you start thinking this way, you can start doing some kind of unusual and creative things. And I recently found myself, I had a phone call where somebody asked me if I could pull off a certain thing. And I said, yes, of course. That's how one, you know, ends up in strange places like Australia. Beautiful country, by the way. So here's a short little clip of what I'm talking about. And once we play it, afterwards we'll go through some of the science. So with that, I present to you Monster Donut.
And scale the whole thing bigger. You can't just put it in the deep fat fryer. Because this brown bit right here, well, by the time the heat actually penetrates into, you know, the bigger donut, like, the middle's going to be still raw before the outside starts to cook. If it gets too big, it's just going to start to burn the outside, and the inside won't cook in time from a food safety point of view. So we have to just figure out how to make a mold around this whole thing that actually can support. It's almost like a bunt pan.
So we're baking first.
Baking first.
And then we're frying.
And then we're frying. So basically we're building up what's called a positive in model making. In this case, I'm just using aluminum foil to actually build up kind of a donut-shaped thing. There.
Bake this thing in a mold, wrap something in plaster, let it set, cut it open, put the dough inside.
This is just crazy enough, it might actually work.
Seal it back up, throw it in the oven, you're good.
Oh my gosh, look at that beauty.
Oh, we have just baked the dreams of Fiorelli into the dust.
It smells so good.
It really was actually fantastic tasting.
We're going to actually start
we can do
with a giant tire tube. We'll actually use the inner tube as a mold.
They make them that big?
They make them that big for industrial tires, so like these really huge tractors.
I love industry.
We can use the inner tube as a mold, and then we'll use a cement mixer to actually mix up the dough and transfer into the mold. I realized we could do exactly the same thing we did on the 1 foot scale at a 5 foot scale, and an inner tube happened to be the perfect thing.
Yeah, I never thought I'd be on national TV with Crisco and rubber gloves on.
Chefs and their crazy, crazy bets.
I should point out that the video is actually an hour long. This is just a 4-minute quick excerpt.
We gotta make the batter, we gotta pour the batter, and we gotta bake this damn donut. Nice!
Looks like a giant sandbox, like a kid. Claire, you're good. Go ahead and bring it forward.
Finally, we have this thing in the oven. And Jeff, he breaks out these two toys of his. He's like, so I've got these thermocouples.
So basically these guys tell you the temperature at the end point. I used one to tell the oven temperature so I knew how hot the environment was. It's saying that it's kind of chilly in here because we haven't turned the oven on yet.
Gotcha.
What you want to do with that one is just like stab it straight down just like you're doing a turkey.
Let's shut these doors and get this thing baking. About how long?
4 hours? 6 hours?
Right.
And now for the piece de resistance, the moment we've all been waiting for.
It looks so much better than I thought it was gonna.
Just wait, guys. We haven't even fried it yet. Once we fry this bad boy,
And the first thing I see is a crane with a huge donut hanging over a dumpster.
all right, so let's keep moving it this way. We've got the donut up on a crane, and it's the moment that we have lived for to fry this donut.
Hey Eric, we have a problem.
Talk to me.
You can't fry your donut, that's it. Not to mention that these wells may not even be able to hold the weight.
I don't like the fact that we're not going to be frying it, to be honest with you.
You know what? Just leave it at that.
But Eric's a great chef, and if he thinks it's going to work, then it'll work. Maybe. Well, I hope it does.
Isn't that pink, right?
There can never be enough chocolate-covered sprinkles. Okay? Just put them all on. I am hyper razor focused on taking what we got and making it into the best baked donut that you can make. Team Greenspan,
Yes?
I do believe we have a donut.
So, yeah, and my list of things that I never thought I would be doing, making a 500-pound donut is definitely somewhere near the top of that list. So, there's a lot of science in there, and it turns out if you're going to make a large donut, that having some of that science background is really, really handy. And even with that science background, there were some, oversights, shall we say, which I will happily talk about as the evening goes along. But let's actually step through some of the chemical reactions that occur in baking something like a donut. In this case, I'm going to use a chocolate chip cookie as an example. Let's start with the idea of a chocolate chip cookie. You've got the dough, and you've got your oven. What happens to that dough when you put it in the oven? Like, what's your mental model? Going back to this idea of simple models and better models. What's your simple model say happens to cookie dough when you put it in the oven? So I heard louder. Come on. Okay.
Starch grains burst.
Wait, what?
The starch grains burst.
The starch grains burst. Yes, indeed. I can tell we have some food technologists in the audience. Excellent. For most people, I've heard answers such as, it turns into a cookie, or magic. Which, these are simple models. It's good. I like it. Actually step through what happens. So here's a lump of chocolate chip cookie dough. You'll notice there's a little line right here. This is actually a probe thermometer, going back to this idea that collecting data is something you can do easily in your kitchen. I just took a probe thermometer, just like those thermocouples you saw stab into the donut, and stuck it into a lump of cookie dough. And here's what happens when you get it, around 92 degrees Fahrenheit, around 32 Celsius. The butter in it starts to melt. So the structure of that dough begins to kind of spread out, and it loses that shape that you put in initially. Then around 100 degrees Celsius, the starch granules burst, they start to melt, and some other stuff happens. And obviously water also steams up. And the edge of that cookie begins to actually set up and hold on to its shape, essentially. And you can kind of see it, there's a line right about here, maybe we'll say, where this bit obviously looks texturally different than the rest of it. Then as we go a little bit hotter, the outside of the cookie starts to turn light brown. Guesses as to what's happening around, say, 155 Celsius? Sugar melting, sugar caramelizing. This is a good guess. It's actually not what's going on at this point. This is a Maillard reaction, which is a reaction between proteins and simple sugars. Basically, these two different components combine, then break down and form hundreds of different compounds, some of which are brown and some of which smell really good. If you think about taking a piece of bread and toasting it, that set of smells that you get from toasting bread and that color, well, those are the Maillard reaction. Really important in cooking. And note here that these reactions under normal conditions don't really begin to happen until 150, 160 Celsius, kind of in that range. And then finally, if you get the cookie hot enough, the outside of it, around 180 Celsius, another reaction occurs, and this is the sugar caramelization that you guys shouted out earlier. And this is similar to the Maillard reaction in that basically the sugars decompose and form hundreds of compounds, some of which are brown, and some of which taste really, really delicious. So here's a really simple baking model, if you will. Follow a recipe and know how to cook. But with a little more science background, you can now begin to think, well, what do I want to have actually happen chemically? Do I want these reactions to occur? Well, then make sure your oven's hot enough. And do I want to avoid them? Well, then make sure your oven's cold enough. And as you'll see as you go through the evening, this is actually a really important thing, the idea that it's the temperature of the food, not the environment, that really matters. So if you're going to go and cook something or roast something or grill something, think about the actual food itself, because the chemical reactions that are occurring are dependent on temperature for most of these reactions, and the temperature of the food itself is really what sets that. Here's kind of a quick little visual proof that I like to use. You can basically see there's a huge color difference. I just took a batch of sugar cookie dough, just following Joy of Cooking, and just cooked it at 25-degree intervals. I apologize, there's no Celsius there, but there's definitely a distinction that kind of happens between the 350 and 375 range.